Once again, welcome to the third session of the Pieces of Systematic Review with Margaret Foster, the 2.0 series. We're so excited so many of you could join us this afternoon or this morning, wherever you're located. First, she needs no introduction, but I do want to give a quick intro to Margaret before I pass things along to her. Margaret is an associate professor at Texas A&M University and serves as the Systematic Reviews and Research Coordinator at the Medical Sciences Library with a joint position at the School of Public Health. Her work with systematic reviews began more than a decade ago while completing her Master's of Public Health, and in her current position, she provides consultations for researchers in a number of fields. She's also published over 30 articles applying or describing systematic review methods and evidence-based practices, and is a co-founder of the Medical Library Association Systematic Reviews Special Interest Group. She has a continuing education course about systematic reviews that has trained over 1,000 libraries. We're so happy to have her as our South Central expert on systematic reviews. Good afternoon, Margaret.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, good. I think you were unmuting me when I was trying to click the button as well. So good afternoon, everyone. So today we're going to be talking about the next step of the process, and we're also going to continue talking about the search. So I hope this isn't a little bit of false advertising, since we're going to spend most of today actually talking about the search, but I will get into some of the evaluation, and then I kind of pushed some of the other parts of the evaluation to the next talk, because there were so many questions more about the search, and so I want to make sure that I cover that as best I can. So go ahead and get started here. So there's just some information about me and the book that Sarah and I wrote for MLA. And then this is a little overview of this entire series. And so today we're going to be talking about the evaluation step of the review. And next time we'll do more about the evaluation, and we'll talk about the role that you can play in the coding and synthesis part of the review. And so here is a little agenda I put together. I want to give a little recap of what we did last time, and then we're going to talk about the steps of the evaluation and also expanded search techniques. So the lecture part might actually go longer, and then we're going to go through those searches that I put as part of the pre-reading, and hopefully answer your questions that you have about that and get a little bit into the evaluation and the screening part as well. Okay. So last time we talked about the development of the search, and I presented these kind of steps trying to divide up the different processes that you would do when designing your search. And so I talked about some different ways that you could benefit from looking at previous or relevant searches, and where to look, how to look at related reviews for their searches. And then we talked some about thinking about the databases that you're going to search. We're going to do more of that today. Then talking about what's required in the standards from Cochrane as far as your search terms go, and designing the search. Some about evaluate and modifying it, and that's a process that you continue to do through the process, throughout the search and the review. What to document, and we'll talk more about documenting today. And then today, many of the searches I have is that translation of the search for other databases. My goal for this webinar is that you'll be able to describe the steps of the evaluation process and what that involves, and then more of the expanded search techniques. And so I tried to put together a little infographic here showing the different the different steps in the search process. So the database search is really kind of the main searches that I think about, searching Medline and Embase and things like that. And then we're going to talk about expanded searches. And then after the expanded searches, then I'll take information I learned from what happens there to update the database searches. And that's something that we'll talk more about in next time. So here are the steps that I put into this evaluation step of the review. And I use that term evaluation so that once I could fulfill the acronym of pieces. And for me, it involves these 4 steps. Although the last step of appraise you might incorporate into the coding step. And I think one of the reviews I read of the book that Sarah and I wrote was they were very curious as to why I put that here. So we'll talk some about that today. So the overall steps are screening, selecting, sorting, and appraising. So some of the experts kind of divide up screening by title and abstract, and they call that screening since you're looking at relevance. And then selection is when you're looking for the study to match all of the criteria. So in the screening process, we're really screening citations. And so that's what I will refer to that process. I talk about those as citations. In the selection process, we're trying to move from citations into thinking more of what we're looking for is studies. Because in the end, that's what we need. And that's what the sorting process is doing, because sometimes you'll have that one study that's written up in multiple reports. And then sometimes you have to sort by study type. I have a slide for each of these processes, so we're going to go through that more in depth. And then the last process I have here, appraising, this is when you're evaluating the studies for the risk of bias. In some groups, some research projects, the group decides that they're going to kick out articles based on this appraisal stage, which is why I kind of think about it as part of this stage of the process, but certainly many decide just to incorporate it into the coding step. I think you can still think about it here, and it's something to talk with your researcher about, because they're going to have to come up with how are they going to do the risk of bias, whether they decide to kick something out or if they choose to do it at the same time as coding articles, which is the main thing we'll focus on next time. So in the screening process, there are certain things that they need to decide and report on. So they've got to report how many people are involved, how the citations are divided, if they're using software, what are they using, and how are they settling disagreements. And sometimes they're not sure how to write this part up. They get kind of worried, like, oh, how do we describe that? And so I'd like to show them examples, especially from the previous reviews we've already found where they've written it up. It's also good to look at Prisma, the explanation articles will spell that out as well. So we have a little message here. Where only in these were appraisers because they were the subject matter experts. So sometimes the appraiser doesn't have to be a subject matter expert if we're talking about looking at risk of bias and looking at applying a tool, and we're going to get into that. So sometimes you don't have to be on that level of the subject matter expert. But sometimes whatever the criteria is, so let's say you decide we only want articles that have followed the patients for this amount of time, that may require a subject expert because they understand what's needed in order to fully answer the question. And so the more subject experts, of course, you can have involved in the project, the better. Sometimes what a group has to do is rely on those experts as consultants, the same as I might be a consultant on it, but that's an important point. Throughout all of these processes that we're talking about, it's important that they test their process, they train the group, whoever's going to be doing this, and they come up with some way of ensuring quality. So one thing that I encourage groups to do is don't wait until everybody has screened individually 2,000 articles to meet and talk about disagreements. Come up with some schedule where you'll meet on a regular basis. Because you are trying to minimize the number of conflicts, but you can't help that. Conflicts are still going to come up, and it doesn't mean that they have low inter-rater reliability. I know some people choose to rate that to do a mathematical calculation of that. Because basically what's happening in the screening stage, when you're just looking at the abstract, you're trying to decide if something is relevant based on 5 or 6 sentences sometimes that were not always well representative of the article. And so you'll have some of the researchers will read more into those sentences than others. And so that's why part of the standard says let's have multiple people doing this. So some of the pre-reading, I gave you some articles that were comparing different tools so that you could see some of the different reviews and ways of testing these tools that are out there. I don't think that it really matters which tool you decide to use. You have to use the one that's best for your situation and your researchers that you're working with. And also some of the reviews that I gave you, some new things have happened since those articles came out. And so with all technology, it's a fast-moving situation where maybe next year there's another great tool that's out there that I'm like, oh, okay, this is the one I'm going to switch to. I have used Rayon a great deal. I have a lot in there, but I've also used other tools as well. So it can really depend on the group and what they're already comfortable with. And so I have a few slides on those different tools and coming up. So some things to think about when they get to the selection process. So this is selecting by full text. They have to describe the same methods and use a similar process that they did in screening. Here they may choose to have more people, less people involved with this process. That's fine, but they still have to define exactly for their reader what they did. Usually I just read enough of the full text to find out, does it match all of my criteria? And sometimes at this stage, they'll get very antsy. Oh, there's these 3 articles, we just couldn't find them. It's not the end of the world. Sometimes that happens. I just label those as unavailable, could not be located by interlibrary loan, however you want to state that. It just becomes a part of my reasons why things were excluded from it. And that hasn't happened a lot, but it does happen sometimes, so it's nothing to be too worried about. So I have a few slides in here demonstrating some of the differences between some of the different tools. So this is Rayon. I have one screen kind of showing if I were in one of the files where I was sorting articles by title abstract. And then this other screen, I know it's kind of small, so sorry about that. I was just trying to show you the summary screen that you get. And so from here you can kind of see the overall, what we had sorted, and the red is excluded, yellow is the things that are labeled as maybe, green is included, and the black, which is kind of what I was trying to show you here, I know it's small, is the conflict. And so you can see if you look over here, if you look on the left side for the Rayon, under the, it's kind of an orange tabs here, it says included decisions, and they list undecided, maybe, included, excluded, and conflict. And so this is where they would go in, click on the conflicts, and then decide which way they wanted to go with these. Some groups decide, hey, you know, if we disagree at this level, we're just going to take all the conflict, the maybes and the included, and move those to full text selection. And sometimes groups decide, no, let's go through the maybes and the conflict and work those out right now. Yeah, so I have used Rayon to work with more than 2 people. They recently updated just a few weeks ago, so I'm still trying to get used to it, where you can actually sort by how many people have already labeled it. So I don't know how well you can see it. I'm sorry, it's a little blurry here, where it says minimum decisions and maximum decisions. So this is showing at least 3 people have labeled 1 article, 2 have labeled 16, and those that just have 1 label at 26. So this can be some indicator. What I normally have done, especially because in the past that was not available, is I batch groups and then assign 2 people to 1 batch. And so for random assignment, that's what I will do. So under search methods, I have I'm just showing you 2 batches here. I have batch 1. This is from Lista, a library science database. I have 100 from there, and then I have batch 2 from there. So I grouped them together because each team or pair was going to be assigned to just 1 batch. I just finished a review where we had about 8,000 articles to sort, and we batched them in groups of 500 in that case, and then each batch was assigned to a pair. And so what we did was, in order to kind of randomize who was getting each batch, it wasn't always the same pair working together. So in that way, you didn't want to have a pair of people that both were very inclusive. They just wanted to say yes to everything. And then you could have a pair where they're more exclusive. We kind of wanted to mix and match them, but we did it on the batch level. But definitely some of these other tools that I'm going to show you next, they have a better way of handling this. So I think all of these products have things that make them more useful than others, and then there's some things I really like about some of them. So one thing I like about Rayon that I haven't seen very well how to do is I can search within Rayon and I can mark multiple items at one time. When I look at Covidence, or I do have a few slides, I have one slide on Abstractor as well. I'm presented with what you can see over here as the abstract. I'm presented with a long list of abstracts, and there isn't really a way for me to search across the abstracts. So let's say that, and this always happens even though I try and say no animal stuff, stuff about animals still comes through on many of the bigger searches that I'll run. In Rayon, I can say, show me all the ones that say mice, and I could mark them out right there. I don't see how to do that in Covidence or Abstractor. Maybe it is there, and I just haven't used it enough to know. I'm not sure. But I did use Covidence for about 30 or 40 reviews 3 or 4 years ago, so I used it a lot then. So if anybody else knows that, if you can do that, that would be great. So I tried to show here how they give the summary. Of course, the thing I love about Covidence is it gives you that Prisma chart. With Rayon, I'd have to look at the numbers myself to put that together. The one thing I'm very curious about is I know that Rayon does not handle duplicates very well at all, so I tend to dedupe before I put it into Rayon. I know that Covidence recognizes duplicates, probably Abstractor does as well, so I'd be curious sometime to know how well each of them handles duplicates. And then you can see the summary screen here that you get from Covidence, where it tells you, okay, for this, 2 people have have screened those 2, and then we have 104 that still need votes. Okay, so Abstractor, you can't search in it, and it doesn't do anything about the dupes. Okay, so I think all of them aren't doing a very good job with dupes. I know when I did this one, though, it was able to locate and see the duplicates in there. So it's doing fine there. But hopefully, whichever tool you use, it's making sure that your client is comfortable, practices with it, and thinks about quality control in how they're going to label things. So this last screen is showing Abstractor here. So you can see I've got an abstract here, and this you get a nice green checkbox, a question mark, and an X. So they all have some way of visualizing this. I think this is the most visual one. And you also have 1 thumb up, 2 thumbs up, or 1 thumb down, 2 thumbs down. So I thought that was interesting. Then it has some summary screens, which shows you the progress that's been done, what you're working on, and then some buttons to get you in there. So not as Abstractor doesn't have as many bells and whistles, of course, as Covidence. Of course, Covidence, you can do more parts of the process in Covidence than in either of these. So I thought I would, oh, you can use keywords in the title abstract using filter. Okay. So that's good. And maybe that's a way that I could use it to get to the ones where I'm looking for the mice or rats or things like that. So I just wanted to give a little overview so you could see some of these. I think the main way to really find out is to just upload some files, and a few files in there, test it out for yourself, play with it. I've never fully used Abstractor. I played with it a little bit from the beginning, but I ended up going with Covidence for a while, and then I switched over to using Rayon. I'm hoping this summer I can actually sit down and get into Distiller. I've seen some of the screenshots from Distiller, and it's a great product if you have the monies. So, okay. So after once they get down to and they've selected articles that they want to include, one thing that they might have to do then is to see how many studies they have. And this is where I start switching over from talking about them as articles into talking about them as studies. So most of the time, 1 study equals 1 article, but sometimes a study is reported on in multiple places. So it could be a conference paper and a peer review article, things like that. Sometimes 1 article equals multiple studies. I see that very often in veterinary medicine. And so this is where I think it's helpful for them to build a table and to start giving some kind of identification number to their studies. It's an easier way to refer to them. And then the last part here is evaluating the risk of bias. And I know many of you have been involved with evidence-based practice, teaching, and medical schools with nursing students, things like that. And so hopefully this will be kind of old hat for you. But for many of the researchers, especially the students I work with, they may not have used these tools before, or they may not be sure like which one to pick. So they need, in order to best help them, I need to know what kinds of studies do we have. Of course, for some reviews, they are only looking for 1 type of study. But for most reviews that I've worked on, it's a wider variety of study types, and so then they're going to have more than one tool that they're using. And the same as all the other processes here, each study should be appraised by 2 independent researchers. Whenever they're randomized control trials, I'm always going to try and get them to use the Cochrane handbook. Their set of criteria there will be the most validated and accepted. And of course, there are other ones out there as well. You may have used CASP for teaching. There's some questions in CASP that you probably don't need to have them work on, such as, hey, is this relevant? Because it wouldn't have gotten through to this part if it wasn't. But definitely there's some other parts of it that might be useful. So when we get into the case studies, I'll show you some examples of what I have used in the past. So this is a quick kind of overview of these steps. And to see how these processes fit into the Prisma flowchart, I tried to do kind of an example here showing the database searches, the other sources, which we're about to talk about in just a minute, and then getting rid of the duplicates, screening, and then looking at full text and screening those out. And then, so sometimes they'll decide at the risk a bias level that they're going to kick out studies at that point. And then you can always put in parentheses, like I did here, 38 studies were found from 40 articles, and that way the math still works out. Because at some point they get nervous about the math, and so it's nice to have it all worked out and show them ways that they can handle it. So the main Prisma flowchart that's presented on their website is mostly just a guide. Sometimes you can take boxes in or out. The main thing to have is so that your reader fully understands the process that you did. They do want to see reasons at the full text level. It's not required at the abstract level, although many groups do decide to also list reasons there. And definitely my first, the person who trained me on how to do systematic review, she always insisted that at the abstract level we had reasons listed there as well. Okay, so now I have some slides talking about what Cochrane expects from the expanded searches, and this is Gray Lit, study reports, clinical trials, that kind of thing. And so that's where the next several slides are coming from, the requirements that are listed there. And I put this quote, and you'll see this quote probably on several slides, where they're talking about the reason why we're doing this is because of publication bias. So I'll talk a little bit about the standards, the challenges, and when do you get to stop searching. So I created this graphic as kind of a reminder of what we're talking about when we say publication bias. So publication bias happens when the results of the published studies are systematically different from the unpublished studies. And so I created this little graphic to kind of demonstrate that, where those studies that had significant results, or at least the the gatekeepers, the journal editors, that kind of thing, declare them that way. And then everything else kind of goes in the trash can or stays in a smaller form, such as it never made it to a fully published paper. It stayed as a conference presentation, poster, that kind of thing. I have on here a study where they looked at they asked several authors why didn't they publish certain things, and some of them they self-selected and said nobody's really going to want to see this, so I'm not going to bother with it. I'm going to prioritize other research to get it published. Some tried to get it published, but then they got rejected by a journal. And I think I just saw that the journal Hypothesis from MLA's research group is now going to start having a column. I can't remember exactly what they call it, something about failure, or if it's something didn't work out, talk about it here. So I think that's great. I think we need a lot more of what didn't work out to be published as well. So when you do a meta-analysis, you can actually graph the potential publication bias there. If you don't do a meta-analysis, then you'd have to do it more in just talking about it and saying, because we limited to English, there's a potential for a publication bias. So you can always go and look at this article to see how to see more about how they created these. But the overall idea is that you're looking for that little kind of Christmas tree there, where you see the where there's no bias there on the left side. It looks like a nice full Christmas tree is how I describe it. And then if you look at the A and B, those don't look quite right. So there's potential issue happening there. And so if you look at the section here where it says B, you can see they're missing the smaller studies. Probably they didn't try to find conference papers and that kind of thing. So what are some situations that can happen? There's, of course, we know about the language bias. So studies with significant results are more likely to be published in English, while others are not, things like that. So this shows some different things that can happen, and that is why part of the reason why Cochrane has set their standards the way that they did. I cited here a book that talks all about publication bias and has lots of studies in it, but many more have come out after this was published, looking at different aspects and across different fields. So I put this slide here. Oh, and I guess because of the color scheme I picked it, my mandatory color is a little different. So mandatory here is orange instead of red. Sorry about that. The blue is labeled highly desirable. And so we'll go through each of these. These letters correspond with the number of the standard. And so if you go and look up the standard, you can see they're numbered in there. So it makes kind of a nice checklist of things to talk with your client about. So we'll go through each of these. I just have a couple times 2 slides for each one. So for this requirement, it calls for searching for different types of evidence. Because Cochrane mostly limits to randomized control trials, they do like for researchers to look beyond those at other types of studies, especially to put things into the full context. I think I've said this before, but many of the reviews I work on, we don't limit to a certain study type, so we already kind of let all the different study types come in. And this will depend on the type of question that you're trying to do, whether or not this makes sense. So the thing to remember about the Cochrane standards is that they were mostly written for effectiveness of intervention types of questions, although Cochrane is trying to expand into other types of questions. They just recently started getting into the diagnostic questions. So just something to keep in mind when you're looking at these standards. Of course, searching for trials registers is going to be really important if you're looking for randomized control trials. But the trial registers also do have observational studies and other types of studies in there. They list these 2 databases of trials as mandatory, so clinicaltrials.gov and the WHO clinical trials. There are others that are popping up, and so you will see if you go and look at the standard that they say search these 2 plus others as appropriate. And there has been a big push to get all the trials together in one place so that people don't have to go to all these different places to find them. And then, of course, there's always issues in searching these different databases. So there's this really great article from Glanville and others where they actually looked at both of those clinical databases required by the standards and talk about the issues. So I kind of tried to highlight on this slide what they were saying. What's interesting is that especially for the clinicaltrials.gov, they were saying that the advanced interface didn't work quite as well as the basic one did. When I tried to go in recently, I wanted to show you all some slides from this, or what I did for this, for one of the cases that we're working on. It wasn't working quite right, so I don't know if I did something wrong. So I'm hoping next time I can show you that, or maybe I need a tutorial from somebody, but I couldn't get the basic interface to look like this. It was more, looked more like the advanced interface. I'm not sure what I was doing wrong there. But definitely it helps to get some guidance on searching these, because it's not as intuitive as you might think. And so hopefully by providing this article for you and an example next time, we can talk about those issues. I know I took a class a few years back at MLA from Glanville, and I'm blanking right now on her first name. I know it starts with a J. I think Julie. That was really great. It was hands-on, and so if you get the chance to take their course, I highly suggest it. So, okay. So searching for Graylit. Of course, Graylit can cover lots of different things. These are just a few of those things that it can cover. This can be really dependent on your topic as to what kind of reports you might want to try and go after. So I've worked on a few reviews where we did need to look at legislative reports, but most of the time I'm looking for conference abstracts and dissertations. So. One of their other requirements is looking within other reviews. So this would be looking for studies included in the other reviews, which a lot of times even before this came out, you would see people mentioning that. So I think that's good. They do mention searching in reference lists. So of your included studies as well as the relevant systematic reviews. I just put a little slide in here showing how much unique that Scopus includes more than Web of Science. It has been an issue sometimes in working with clients, especially who are very familiar with Web of Science and not so familiar with Scopus. So here you see in blue, I highlight is showing what's unique to Scopus. Orange shows the overlap between Scopus and Web of Science, and the gray would just be what's in Web of Science. This was done a couple years ago, so 2016, and they use Ulrichs to decide what was included in each one. So sometimes that has helped me in working with clients and trying to decide which one are we going to use for this. But it can be dependent on the topic as well. So, this, I think this is probably the last one on here. This is where you can contact individuals, organizations, what makes sense. It's kind of where you're putting out your sign to say, hey, we want studies that match this. This has been when I have really tried to do this, it has been really helpful. Sometimes the researchers kind of push back on this, or they don't feel like they have time to do this. But basically, it just involves putting out on a listserv and saying, hey, I'm working on this review. We're looking for studies that match this. Does anybody have something that matches this? And so this is trying to get around, maybe they didn't have great significant results, so they didn't try and publish it. I've seen a few people talking about other ways of searching, and so many times I have seen where there list specific journal titles that were hand searched in some way. You'll notice that Cochrane doesn't have hand searching on there anymore. But there's sometimes for some topics, there's a few known journal titles that we know are not indexed well, or certain sections that are not indexed well. Do I search the reference list or have them do it? It really depends. Most of the time I have them do it because I don't have time. But there are some projects where I will do that. And I don't screen them. I just give them all of the references and have them screen them. So I've done it in all different ways. I've seen sometimes the client will ask for book chapters. This is not an easy thing to search for. Sometimes there's monograph series which act a great deal like journals, and so those might be easier. The main thing that I encourage them is I say, okay, we're looking for studies, so as long as that book chapter is as a report of a study, then we want to include it. But you don't include, just a narrative review or something like that. Now, definitely for background, that's perfectly fine. The other thing that I don't see when I look at the Cochrane list is talking about articles that are citing the included articles. They're just talking about past articles. And so that is something that I do encourage them to do. So of course, there's challenges in doing all of these things. Sometimes they're like, no, we've already have enough, we don't want to do any more. Some of the different, especially if you go to some of the Grail or the report searching sites, there's not an easy way to export. During this part, I don't worry about, can I get everything I'm trying to screen here into Rayon or Abstractor or whatever tool you're going to use. I just make sure that whatever we decide to do, that we're recording numbers and searches and things like that. So sometimes we just have to print out those titles and kind of mark them down, and then I'll just record how many were found and how many were excluded, things like that, rather than try and figure out how I've got to create some citations for these or whatever. So I describe here a little bit based on which standard you're talking about, what to record. I think from any of this, it's always the same thing. What was the resource? What date did you search it? What did you search? What limits did you put on? And what were your results? And so those are the things that I just keep track of. And you just want to make sure that you're able to describe it is the main thing, whatever they decide to do there. So when do you stop searching? That's one of my most common questions that I get. And for the most part, it's, have you covered all of the standards that you wanted to? I don't always do all those things I just showed you. Part of it is based on what kind of review am I doing? Does it make sense to go there? Part of it is the kickback that I'll get, of course, from my client. I'll always encourage them to do that. But in the end, it is what it is. And here you'll see again, they talk about did they limit to English? That's a known bias. And so if they're going to limit to English, I say, that's very common. People do that all the time. Then we're going to need to acknowledge in our limits of the paper that could lead to potential bias. So it's just important for them to realize that. Next time, we're going to talk about modifying the search based on what happens here. So basically, after we conduct the database searching, and then we move on to the expanded searches. If they find anything from those expanded search techniques that we missed, then we need to go back and look at the databases again. And so we'll talk about that next time. Okay, so I want to stop here and answer any questions that have come up based on the things we've talked about so far, and see if I need to go back to any of the screens. Okay. Well, if you think of anything, we can always go back. So now we can go through the case studies. And so part of the pre-reading that I sent out was I tried to give you all of these searches. And so at this point, let's see. Yes, it will be recorded. At this point, I have met with a client twice. The first time was to kind of figure out what's your topic. The second time was to start I looked at, they had more refined eligibility criteria. I started, then I modified the search based on that. I gave them some more things to think about. And so now we're starting to get into more parts of the protocol, thinking about more of what we're going to do. And although at this stage I wouldn't necessarily go out and run all the searches, I wanted to walk through the translation of the search across the databases. At some point I still may have to update or change them a little bit. And so I thought one exercise that we might do is that I give you the included articles and see, do the searches bring those back? So we might do that for next time. Okay, so here I completed those searches. I'm uploading them for them and making sure that I present those, and then we're going to talk about their next steps that they have to work on. Okay. So for this was the scope. Oh, really, I should have put that on here. I'm sorry. So this was for the scoping review, just working back to what the topic was. This is for the scoping review that we're looking at adolescents, suicide, and depression. And so, so for that, I decided to focus on these databases that I listed here. And then I have the searches on the screens coming up. And then after I present these searches to them and start uploading them, then talk about other things that we might think about. So what about, there could be some clinical trials, and I did see some when I went to search. What about other reports, other groups? What do they think about that? So this was the Medline search that I had done. I saved the search in Ovid, especially because I'm probably going to have to rerun it later, and that's when I will look at, we can talk about that in our last session, talking about updating and how to limit to certain dates in Ovid and the other ones as well. And then now I have to translate this into the other databases. So for this search, I basically just had 3 criteria. I had diabetes, depression, and they had the client decided they wanted that ORD with suicide, so we brought that in, and then adolescent, our population. So then for the title and abstract, I always keep those the same. And then whenever I go to a new database, then I'm looking for the tags for that database. So this next screen, I'm showing CINAHL, an EBSCO database, and then InBase from Ovid. So InBase, it covers pharmaceutical journals and more international journals than Medline does. So I know some estimate I saw said it covered at least 2,000 journals beyond what Medline does. So sometimes you have to explain to your client, well, why are we searching this one? And then so CINAHL covers nursing and allied health literature more than Medline does, so we're bringing that in. So hopefully here you can see the changes of what I had to do going from an Ovid database into an EBSCO database. One frustrating thing with EBSCO, of course, is that I can't do title and abstract together, so I always copy whatever I'm going to search in one and search it in the other. Any questions about the screen? Oh, and I see a mistake. Oh, this always happens, right? It should not say ADJ here. Maybe you can see this on the second to the last line on CINAHL is where one is, and there's another one further up. So when I was doing the translation from Ovid into EBSCO, I needed to change the ADJ to an N. I'm going to make a note for myself. This example, this case study that I'm showing y'all is not one that I actually had to do. So thankfully I haven't messed up, although I'm showing you a mistake. And this is also where, of course, it's really helpful to have somebody else look at your searches and see if you made any mistakes there. So, have any questions about translating from Ovid into EBSCO or any other like syntax things here? So how do I find a peer reviewer? So usually I find a coworker to do that here, especially as now there are more people here than before that are familiar with the requirements of a systematic review. And then especially when I get into the next slide, talking about ERIC and PsycInfo, because I work with education and psychology librarians, I can show them. So there are different ways that you could do that. One way is for press. They do have a wiki where you could put a search in there, and I can make sure to have that link for y'all next time. So it could, the main thing that person would need to know that you're going to share with them is what was the eligibility criteria that you built the search on. And sometimes it's nice to show them a few citations that you already know you want to be included. And then the press checklist is a great checklist. I think I had covered that in the last set of webinars that I did, but I could always do that next time just a little bit to talk about what do they look at there. That's basically what you would expect. So it's thinking about, do you have all the subject headings there? Did you miss any keywords? Are you including the right criteria in the search? And so the one thing that I would not want to put into the search would be outcomes here. So, okay. So in this next screen, then we have ERIC database and then PsycInfo. And so one thing that you'll see differing between PsycInfo and Medline will be that, of course, PsycInfo being speaking the language of psychology has many more tags for depression, getting into more fine detail about different types of depression. And then ERIC, of course, for education has the tags for all the different types of students there. So hopefully I'm showing the differences there, and I still need to fix that ERIC search, so go in and fix that. Any questions about either of these, searching them? Both ERIC and PsycInfo have their own thesaurus, and so I will always go into whatever database I'm working on to see, do they have a thesaurus, and then I just keep, like I said, all my keywords as much the same and the syntax as much the same as I can. Okay. And so one of the places I wanted to search for this topic is Cochrane Central. And so I'm showing you the search that I ran there. Okay, do I include the search strategy for each database in the appendix? My goal is for them to have all of the searches, and then sometimes the database will the journal editor will decide how much they're going to include, what will be a supplemental. I would like for at least one of the searches to be in the main manuscript, because that's what you need to see, at least one. And for the most part, for most of the reviews I've worked on, that's going to be Medline. For some, it has been Eric. And then the rest may be an appendix. We also have a repository here that I can put searches in, so I could put a permit, kind of a link in there and do it that way, but that is my goal, is for them to get there. I know that Cochrane does have mesh headings in it, but because my purpose in searching this was to find the things that were in there that were not from PubMed or Embase, I purposely did not search for those mesh headings. So you'll see here I'm just searching title, abstract, keyword, and then I'm using lines 5 and 6 are to try and sort out those that were from PubMed or Embase. So I went from 172 trials down to 19. This was a tip I saw from a few other places to show how to just get the things that are unique from Cochrane Central. Have any questions about that? A few things that I see often in a methods section for systematic reviews is when they talk about searching Cochrane, will say that they just searched Cochrane. They won't explain which database. And so I think it's important to specify which database in Cochrane that you searched. Okay, so line 5, this is something that I saw somebody else do, so I used that. And line 5 is where I'm trying to pull all, I'm getting together all the ones that came from PubMed, and then line 6 are the articles that came from Embase, because they'll have something that says accession number, accession and PubMed in those records. And then I'm saying I don't want any that have that, so I can try and limit down to things that are unique from Central. And so let's see. Oh, so when I was talking about that, so Central is not listed in the expanded searches. Central is listed in Cochrane as part of a main search. So sorry, I didn't mean to be confusing about that. So Central, although they're calling these trials here, they're not really clinical trials. These, for the most part, are, well, some of these are actually, so sorry about that. I'm being confusing. Let me start again. So clinical trials are, these are random, what they're focusing on the most part is randomized controlled trial study reports. Many of those do come from Medline or Embase. So they're not necessarily a clinical trial. Then by searching Cochrane Central and saying, okay, don't show me anything from PubMed or Embase, many of the ones that you'll get back then are going to be clinical trials. But Cochrane of course, wants you to search Cochrane Central. So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to be confusing about that. So Cochrane is calling for Medline, Embase, and Central to be searched, as well as the clinical trials databases and other ones. So I hope that that makes it more clear. But you'll notice here on this screen that several of these do come from the clinicaltrials.gov website that got added in. So I hope I didn't I'm not confusing there. So another expanded search that I did was using an Ovid database called Northern Light Life Sciences. And so it focuses on conference abstracts from the life sciences. It doesn't have subject headings in it, so it's just title abstract searching, and it's an Ovid database. And then I tried to show here a screen shot of potentially, I got 64 back, and this is what I thought maybe they might want to look at. And so it will have links within there, which are separate from our link resolver that you could click on, and usually takes you directly to the website that has the abstract or poster or something like that. So here we're looking at, I'm not going to try it, dystemic. So this is really going to be dependent on how your client, what they would like to see search. So if they want that as part of the keywords searched, then that is something definitely you would want to add in and talk with them about. So for this one, because I don't actually have a client to talk with, I could have added it in there. Or for the other one, we just really wanted to focus on depression and depressive symptoms. So sometimes you'll come up with lots of synonyms that you think would be great for them, and they don't always agree with you. But thank you for that question. That's a good question. And so one of the other places that I searched for this one was a ProQuest database, which is just one of several databases that you could consider for dissertations. And so here's just showing like the difference with the interface. And then we see a lot has been published in the last few years on this topic. So we actually got 81 by looking at the dissertations. So for dissertations, sometimes they're like, oh, you know, the dissertation, it's 300 pages long. Usually there's just one chapter, though, that's talking about the actual study that they did for their dissertation. And so I would suggest that they focus on that. They don't have to read the whole thing. They're just looking for that study report in there. So sometimes you get different questions from the client. One question that I got was one of the studies, they saw it as an abstract in a conference, as a peer review article, and also we found the dissertation. So which one do they use? And the answer is all of them. So it's still just going to count as one study. That's just the default, sorry, go back on screen. That NOFT, that's just the default if I don't put in title or abstract. I think it's saying everything but full text, so not full text, something like that. It does look funny. I think that's just a ProQuest thing. Let me go forward here. So they were asking which one do they use for the coding, and they really need to, they might have to use all of them depending on their questions. Probably the dissertation, because you can write so much more, may have fuller details about certain methods. Certainly the abstract for the poster would be, or a paper presentation would be the shortest. And so another question that somebody working on a scoping review will probably have is, do they have to conduct critical appraisal? And this is where we start to see the differences between a systematic review and a scoping review. So most scoping reviews are going to be just kind of touching the surface on what they've collected. They're not going to code every article in as much depth. And so you're going to see more differences between the two during our next talk. So for the most part, you don't see them do any kind of risk of bias. Now, they could do it. I think risk of bias appraisal is a very important process. But if they're just going to be talking about the trends in the research, kind of what's out there, then it's not going to be a part of the scoping review for the most part. But you will see it when you look at the scoping review requirements for what needs to be reported. They will put that, I think it's line 12 here. So with conference abstract, is there enough information to appraise it? Okay, so this is a great question. This is something that clients will ask often as well. Some conference abstracts, instead of it just being some conferences, you have whole papers. So a lot of times there's information there. But if you're right, if you just have an abstract, that's not going to be enough information. So then you have options. We could use it as a breadcrumb to see, did they ever publish on this? You could contact the author and say, we would like to know more information about your study. Would you like to fill this in? And then if they don't give enough information, then that would be a reason to kick it out and say not enough information. So it can really depend here on what your situation is. But you're right, for the most part, it's definitely not going to be enough information. So this client will need to work on selecting some articles by full text. And so here at this point, I ask them to focus on finding a few articles that they know that they're going to include so that they can start working towards having a data abstraction form. And next time we're going to talk about how to help them with this process. And for the most part, I'm an outsider on this. I'm showing them some different tools, different things to think about, examples. And so that's something we're going to talk about next time. But I am asking them to look for some articles that they know for sure, some studies they know for sure they want to include. I also asked them to look through anything they collected before they came to see me to see if any of those things meet their criteria. And so next time we'll talk about, okay, now they present you with some articles that your search didn't find, what do you do now? So we can talk about that. Do you have any questions about this scoping review case study? Any questions about writing up the protocol or anything about that? So what if you don't have access to Embase? So that can really depend on your topic. So I think some topics, Embase is really important, especially if you had a question about a drug or anything pharmaceutical. So I know that some people then also search Scopus to try and make up for what Embase has that's not in Medline. I don't know the overlap there. I know that I've seen some people do that. And so this is a great question about Ovid versus PubMed. So the reason why I like Ovid over PubMed is because of adjacency or proximity searching. And so that's where I can search, I want this word within so many words of this word, and I can do that across multiple ones. Right now you can't do that in PubMed. I have seen that PubMed is coming out with a new version, a beta version soon, that I think is going to try and make up for that. Yeah, and so I'm not I I don't search SciFinder. I know that we have it. A user hostile interface. I feel that way about Compendex. And you know, many people search PubMed for systematic reviews and do just fine. It's just sometimes the search has to be longer in order to make up for not being able to do proximity searching. That's a good question. I know that there is a way to do that. It's been a while since I used that limiter. Probably somebody in here knows it off the top of their head, and I just don't, because I don't search PubMed that often. Not for systematic reviews. Index to Medline is the limit. Okay. I think when they come out with their new new search interface, there's going to be some big changes coming. Yeah, so I don't know what to say about predatory journals. That's an interesting thing. I just took a workshop about predatory journals a few months ago. I'm still learning more about it. I think it's going to be an interesting question going forward. So I don't know the answer to that. So hopefully you got your question answered about the limiting there. I knew some of y'all would know it. I use PubMed more as a quick searching interface for Medline than I do as to be comprehensive for the most part. So then our second case, this was a systematic review. We are looking at cross-sectional studies, especially with diabetes, depression, and exercise. And so I did a very similar thing here, and then I gave you the searches that I did. And so I want to talk with my client about the places that I search, other places we're going to search, questions they had about screening, and then evaluation, the risk of bias evaluation. Do I prefer the age range search terms or database limits? So you want to use whatever you have at your disposal. So I never just depend on the database limits for age. I've always got to do both. The problem with adult is that most studies don't talk about their participants as adults. They'll say other things. So, so for adults, I'll say, give me anything that was marked as adult by Medline or has adult in the title abstract, and then I will OR that with not kids. And so so adult is an interesting one, but you never just want to use the limit in any of the databases for age. So for this search, because they were including exercise, I also wanted to use sport discus. And because in this one we were looking at adults, I didn't include ERIC as an additional database. And so you'll just see a very similar pattern here of where I've got my, my three criteria here: diabetes, depression, exercise. I should have also shown you at one point I did have as part of this search where we were trying to limit down to cross-sectional studies. What we found in doing that was we limited out several things that we did want, and so we decided to throw out study type as a limiter in our search. Although we tried lots of different keywords for that. So one question that I did have for for the researcher at this point was, should we be listing out different types of exercise, such as walking and yoga and other things? And so one of the exercises that I'll give y'all for next time is looking at some of the articles that came out of this this searching that we did, where we were trying to figure out, do we need to list those? And for the most part, what I wanted them to do was say, yes, we need to do that, especially for that, like some of the major types of exercises, interventions that were known. But because they were looking at cross-sectional and not necessarily interventions, this is where we had the back and forth. So hopefully, by the time we get to the next one, you'll be able to see what we were doing there. So here I was searching by title and abstract, and I see you put in TW. There's all different there's different fields that you could think about here. I know sometimes I'll see it where they do TI, AB, and KW. For the most part, I have just done this, but I do know that might be more limiting than I mean to. And then talking about Rayon and Ovid here, you found that the RAS format is not going well into Rayon. I had a little bit of trouble, but not a ton of trouble. For me, with EBSCO, it has depended on which database that I'm in. But I would agree with you that going into EndNote or RefWorks is probably the better way to go, because those citation programs can handle the duplicates much better than Rayon can. So maybe I haven't seen it quite as often since I usually do that anyways, but I would agree that that can be an issue. Okay, so then here is CINAHL and then Embase. Because they wanted to also include recreational exercise, we did put sport in here. And then, as I said, we'll talk next time about what happened when I was trying to encourage them to let me put walking and some other major activities into here. So we had a little bit of back and forth about that. So I'll just go forward to this next one and then see if you have any questions for me at this point. I will say that one thing when I'm looking at the searches between Medline and, say, Sport Discus or PsycInfo, in Medline I can say explode a term, and then I don't necessarily see all of those terms listed on the search page. It just says explode. When you do that in EBSCO and you click explode, it will put all the terms on there, so many times it looks like, oh, I did a much better, fuller search in EBSCO than I did in Medline, and it's just that in EBSCO they'll just list them all out instead of just saying explode. So. Okay, well, if you don't have any questions about those, so I did the same thing with Cochrane Central here, and in this, for this one I got back many more trials, so I got 87 back, and here you can see the first couple that I got back did come from clinical trials, and then I had some other ones that were coming from different sources. And so then I'll talk next time about how we started sorting those out. So in this case, I was just trying to find things that were unique to Cochrane Central and not were not indexed by Medline. So I didn't put mesh in here. And I know plenty of people do. I just didn't do that for this one. I was trying to find the things that were unique. And then there was an issue with Central recently where Mesh wasn't working. So when I was trying to prepare for this, I wasn't getting it to work nice for me. So I was just showing an example of if you just wanted to see what was unique, how you could do that here. So hope that answers your question. Okay. So then I did a similar thing for using Ovid's conference abstract one, and there are lots of other conference abstract databases to search. I just happen to like this one because it's very limited down to life sciences. Because this one also looked at exercise, it may be important that I go and look at some other conference databases as well. But we got a nice collection back from here that covered some different, many of the conferences that we were interested. So here you can see this is from a psychiatry conference. Then we searched request dissertations. We actually got back many dissertations here, and we decided to limit down by years more than we had thought about doing, but you can see there was a big uptake recently for dissertations on this topic. So for this one, because they were mostly focusing on cross-sectional study types of studies, I suggested that we try out using the Joanna Briggs Institute critical appraisal list for cross-sectional studies. So I put the link on here so you can go there, and you see they have lots of different study types available. And so I showed the researcher this page, and then I showed them this tool here. So what JBI does is they have their tool, and you can see here there's 8 questions there: yes, no, and clear, or not applicable. And then for each question, they have listed out, here's the question and here's what they're looking for, kind of an explanation there. Sometimes, depending on the types of studies they're looking at, they may look at these questions and they may say, oh, you know what, number 7 isn't going to make sense. I think 7 makes perfect sense for everybody, but let's just say that they're like 7 may not make sense. They would need to have an explanation in their write-up and the methods about why they altered it. But for the most part, we just take all the questions. And so I would like them to start getting familiar with these tools, because the quicker they get into looking at risk of bias and everything, the quicker they may realize exactly what it is that they want to focus on for their paper, and you're getting more into the steps that they're going to do further down the road, rather than having sorted thousands of articles before they figured out exactly what they wanted. So getting them into this with their first few ones they already know they want to include, I have found has been very helpful. We're going to talk more about the how do you do this next time, as far as kind of a workflow of doing this, because I'm going to incorporate this into the coding part. And this is typically the things that I cover in a third discussion with the group, as long as with a group of researchers, as long as we're moving forward. I do encourage them to keep working on their protocol, and all the searches that I've done so far, these have all been drafts. We might have to change some things as we're working. And this is what I encourage them to continue to work on. This is a screenshot of our protocol that we had at this point, where you can start to see they're talking about what they're going to do, what they plan on doing for selection and coding and for risk of bias. And they listed here, we were going to use the Joanna Briggs cross-sectional one, and it ended up we also needed to use the one that was for longitudinal studies as well. And we'll talk about that in more depth next time. So leaving let's see, I think I've covered everything from there. So those are the two case studies that we've been working on. Next time we will be talking more about the how of the risk of bias appraisal and getting into the coding, and more about how I had to update the searches based on what they found out as we went through. And we have a few more minutes for questions here, not too much.
Yeah, so if there are any final questions, people can go ahead and put them in the chat box. Even if we don't have time for them, Margaret will certainly be happy to follow up with people, I'm sure. And we do have our reporting poll still to come, so if you would all hang in there and stay logged in for just a few more minutes.
So those links, I believe they're on the NNLM page already for the last one, the last sessions.
Yeah, let me go grab that URL for you and put it in the chat box. That link is the link for all of the information on the Pieces series. We also have the original series, the one from 2017, is all archived on that page as well if anyone is interested. But the videos from Session 1 and Session 2 are also both linked on that page as well. And Session 3 will be on there within the next week.
Okay, well, if there's no more questions, you can always send me questions as well. And I guess you can go ahead and do your polling questions. And thank you, everybody.
Great. Thank you so much, Margaret. I'm going to go ahead and end today's recording, and then we'll go into some of our final housekeeping.